The great library of Nexus Prime stood at the heart of the Concord's capital world, its crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens like frozen lightning for 3,000 years. The Concord of 12 species had ruled the Orion Spur in peace and prosperity, and the library contained the knowledge of every civilization that had ever joined their alliance. The Valkyrie, with their bodies made of living crystal that chimed when they moved, served as the keepers of this sacred place. They were diplomats and scholars, beings who valued knowledge above all else. And they had spent millennia cataloging every species, every world. Every secret the galaxy had to offer. Elder Karth Vel was old even by Valkyrie standards. Her crystalline form clouded with age, and her chime soft and weary. She had spent 400 years in the deepest archives, studying texts that other scholars dismissed as fantasy and legend. Today, as she had done every day for centuries, she sat alone in a chamber that no one else ever visited, reading the forbidden files. The files were labeled with a simple designation that made other Valkyrie uncomfortable. Sol 3. Earth, Homo sapiens, you waste your time with children's stories. Her colleague Mareth Kal had told her just that morning, his crystal body ringing with disapproval. The human texts are nothing but mythology created by some ancient species to frighten their young. Karth Vel had not argued with him because she had learned long ago that arguing was pointless. No one believed the humans were real. No one wanted to believe the texts described a species so full of contradictions that logic itself seemed to reject their existence. According to the ancient records, humans were soft creatures with no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no speed. They could not see in the dark or hear beyond a narrow range or approaching. By every measure that the Concord used to evaluate species, humans should have been prey animals, food for more capable predators. But the texts told a different story. They spoke of a species that refused to accept their limitations, that looked at a universe that seemed designed to kill them and simply said, no. The humans had been born on a world that tried to destroy them with ice ages and supervolcanoes and asteroid impacts. Yet they had survived every catastrophe. They had no claws. So they invented spears and swords and guns. They had no armor. So they built walls and castles and bunkers. They could not fly. So they constructed machines that carried them through the sky and then beyond the sky. And then to their own moon. Karth Vel turned the ancient pages with trembling hands as she read the passages she had memorized long ago. The text described human wars that had killed millions of their own kind. Conflicts fought over land and resources and ideas, and sometimes nothing at all. They wrote of weapons that could turn cities to ash in an instant, of poisons that could make worlds uninhabitable for generations. Any other species reading these accounts would see only monsters, only destruction, only a civilization that deserved to burn itself out. But Karth Vel had read deeper than anyone else. And she had found the other stories. She had found accounts of humans running into burning buildings to save strangers they had never met. She had read of soldiers throwing themselves onto explosives to protect their companions, of doctors traveling to disease-ridden lands knowing they might never return, of ordinary people giving their lives for others without a moment of hesitation. The text spoke of a species that would fight to the death over trivial matters, but would also cross oceans to help those in need. They described beings who poisoned their own world while simultaneously planting forests they would never live to see. The contradictions were maddening, impossible, and utterly fascinating. How can one species contain so much darkness and so much light? Karth Vel whispered to herself, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. She had asked this question 1,000 times and had never found an answer. The other scholars believed the human texts were allegories, stories invented to teach moral lessons about the dangers of aggression and the importance of cooperation. The Thornax. The massive armored warriors who served as the Concorde's military force used the human legends as training scenarios. Be like the humans, their instructors would say. Relentless and adaptable and impossible to break. But they did not truly believe humans existed. They thought they were simply using a useful myth, the Cylindri. Beings of living light who could reshape reality with their thoughts. Dismiss the text entirely. No physical species could accomplish what these records describe. They declared, the humans are clearly a symbolic representation of chaos and disorder. A warning against abandoning reason for emotion. Only Karathvel suspected the truth. Only she had noticed the detail that everyone else had missed. The human texts did not end with a conclusion. They did not describe the extinction of the species or their evolution into something else or their departure from the galaxy. The records simply stopped mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted and had never returned to finish, and at the very end of the final file, in handwriting that did not match any known species, someone had added a single notation. They are coming back. Karathvel had spent decades analyzing that handwriting, trying to determine who had written those 4 words, and when she had found no answers, only more questions. But she had also found something else, buried in the mathematical records that accompanied the text's trajectory calculations. The files contained precise calculations showing the paths of 12 objects, leaving the Sol system approximately 3,000 years ago. The objects were traveling at speeds that should have been impossible, heading toward the galactic rim, toward the empty space where no known species had ever ventured. Karathvel had plotted those trajectories forward, accounting for gravitational effects and stellar drift and 100 other variables according to her calculations. If those objects were still traveling, if they had survived whatever journey they were on, they would be approaching Concorde space within her lifetime. She had shared this finding with the High Council once. Decades ago, they had laughed at her. You have spent too long reading fairy tales, the Thornax Admiral had rumbled, his armored bulk shaking with amusement. Next you will tell us that the sky is falling. Karathvel had returned to her archives in shame, and she had never spoken of her discovery again, but she had never stopped watching every day. She checked the sensor reports from the border stations, looking for anomalies, looking for anything unusual, and every day she found nothing until today. The message arrived on her personal terminal just as the artificial sun of Nexus Prime began to set, casting long shadows through the crystalline halls of the library. It was from a sensor technician at a remote station called Kethrani 7, a lonely outpost at the very edge of map space. The message was short, and the technician's fear was evident in every word. Elder Karathvel, I do not know why I'm sending this to you, but your name was in the old files as someone who studied the human texts. And I do not know who else to contact because no one believes me. The stars are disappearing. 17 so far in Sector Null, replaced by shadows that my sensors cannot identify. The shadows are moving. They are coming this way. Please, if you know what this means, please help me. Karathvel read the message 3 times, her crystal body ringing with a frequency she had not produced in centuries. It was the sound of fear mixed with hope, of dread mixed with wonder. She looked up at the ancient text spread before her, at the records of a species that had vanished 3,000 years ago, at the notation written in unknown handwriting. They are coming back. The legends were about to become real. Sensor technician Uriel had served at Kethrani 7 for 6 long years, and in all that time, he had never detected anything more interesting than a rogue comet. The station was a punishment posting, a place where the Concorde sent those who had disappointed their superiors or simply had no connections to secure. Better assignment. Cyril was neither a failure nor friendless, but he was young and inexperienced, and someone had to watch the empty void at the edge of known space he had accepted the assignment with quiet dignity, telling himself that even boring work served a purpose. But after 6 years of staring at unchanging sensor readings, he had begun to wonder if anyone would notice if he simply stopped watching altogether. The night everything changed began like every other night. Uriel sat at his console in the small control room, surrounded by screens that displayed the positions of distant stars and the occasional wandering asteroid. The station's only other occupant was a maintenance drone that hummed quietly in the corner, performing its endless cycle of repairs and cleaning. Uriel was thinking about his dinner, a tasteless ration pack that awaited him in the tiny galley. When the first star disappeared, he blinked and leaned forward, certain that his eyes were playing tricks on him. Star catalog number 7749 Null 3 had been burning steadily in Sector Null for billions of years. A distant red dwarf that served as a navigation reference point. Now it was simply gone, replaced by an empty darkness that his sensors could not penetrate. Taro ran a diagnostic on his equipment, convinced that something had malfunctioned. The diagnostic came back clean. He ran another and another, and each time the results were the same. His equipment was functioning perfectly. Star was simply not there anymore. Before he could process this impossibility, another star vanished, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Earl watched in growing horror as the darkness spread across his sensor display like a stain, swallowing stars that had burned since before his species had learned to walk upright. Within an hour, 17 stars had disappeared, replaced by shadows so vast that his instruments could not calculate their size. And the shadows were moving. They were moving toward Concord Space Orcs. Hand shook as he composed his distress call, sending it to every authority he could think of. He contacted the Thornax Military Command and received an automated acknowledgement. He contacted the Concord Science Division and was told that his report would be reviewed within 30 standard days. In desperation, he searched the old files for anyone who might understand what he was seeing, and he found a name buried in the ancient records about something called the human text. Elga Korafvel did not know why he sent the message to her, but something told him that she might believe him when no one else would. The response from Thornax Military Command arrived 3 days later, and it was not what Rill had expected. Admiral Garth himself was coming to investigate, bringing with him 200 warships. The largest military deployment in 4 Centauri. Esril felt a mixture of relief and terror as he watched the Thornax fleet emerge from faster-than-light transit, their massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons that could crack planets in half. Admiral Gorath was a legend among the Concord species, a warrior who had put down 3 rebellions and negotiated peace treaties with a dozen hostile civilizations if anyone could handle whatever was out there in the darkness. It was him. The Admiral's face appeared on Rill's communication screen, his armored features carved from what looked like living stone. "Show me," Gorath commanded, and Uriel transferred his sensor data to the flagship. There was a long silence as the Admiral reviewed the information. "This is not possible," Gorath finally said, but his voice held no conviction. "Admiral, with respect, I am telling you what I have observed." "I know," Gorath replied, and for the first time, Rill heard something in the old warrior's voice that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Prepare your station for evacuation, technician, and then join us on the flagship, because we are going to find out what is hiding in that darkness." The Thonax fleet moved in perfect formation towards Sector Null, their engines burning bright against the void. Uriel watched from the observation deck of the flagship, his hearts beating faster than they ever had before. He was a sensor technician, not a soldier, and he had no business being here. But Admiral Garth had insisted, saying that Uriel was the only one who had been watching when the shadows first appeared, and his observations might prove valuable. The fleet traveled for 2 days before they reached the edge of the darkness. What they found there defied everything Uriel thought he knew about the universe. The Shadows were not natural phenomena, they were ships so massive that the Thornax dreadnoughts looked like insects beside them, their hulls stretching for hundreds of kilometers, their surfaces scarred and pitted by journeys that must have lasted millennia. There were hundreds of them, arranged in formations that spoke of military discipline and overwhelming force, and behind them, emerging from the void like an endless tide, came thousands more. Admiral Gorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, his stone face betraying no emotion as his officers reported the impossible numbers. "Open a communication channel," he ordered, his voice steady despite what they were facing. "All frequencies, all languages. Broadcast our standard greeting and request identification." The communication officer obeyed, and for a long moment there was only silence. Then a voice answered, speaking in a language that had not been heard in the galaxy for 3,000 years. The translation systems took several seconds to process the ancient words, and when they finally rendered the message into something the Thornax could understand, every being on the bridge went still. "This is the Terran Reclamation Fleet. Flagship Endeavor, representing the United Human Colonies. We have traveled very far and very long to reach this place. We have returned to known space. Do not be afraid." Rill felt his legs go weak beneath him. The human texts were not legends. Stories were not myths. The species that the Concord had dismissed as impossible, the beings who had supposedly vanished 3,000 years ago, had come back, and they had brought an armada that made the Thornax fleet look like toys. Admiral Gorath recovered his composure faster than anyone else on the bridge. "This is Admiral Gorath of the Concord Defensive Fleet," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had commanded armies. "We require proof of your identity and an explanation of your intentions." The response came after a brief pause, and this time the voice was accompanied by an image. A face appeared on the main view screen, and Uriel stared at it with a mixture of fascination and unease. The being had soft features, no armor or scales or crystal, just smooth skin and dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths he could not fathom. It was a human, a living, breathing human. "Admiral Gorath," the human said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like sadness. "My name is Director Chun of the Terran Continuity Project, and I am authorized to speak on behalf of all human settlements. As for proof of our identity, I think the ships behind me speak for themselves. We are what remains of Earth. We are the children of Sol. We have been gone for a very long time, and we have seen things that would give your species nightmares for generations. But we are not your enemies. We have come home." Admiral Gorath stared at the screen, and for the first time in his long career, he had absolutely no idea what to say. The legends were real. The humans had returned, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The Concord Council had not convened an emergency session for 800 years. But when word spread that the human legends had returned with an armada of impossible size, every species sent their representatives to Nexus Prime within days. The crystalline chambers of the council hall filled with beings of every shape and form, their voices rising in a chaos of fear and confusion and disbelief. The Valkyrie diplomats chimed anxiously as they tried to maintain order. The massive Thornax warriors stood along the walls with their weapons ready. Though no one knew what enemy they were preparing to fight, the Solinri ambassadors flickered between colors, their light forms shifting with agitation as they debated among themselves. And in a corner of the great hall, Elder Carthvel sat quietly, watching everything with ancient eyes that had finally seen their life's work validated. "They cannot be real," the Solinri High Ambassador declared, her form burning bright yellow with distress. "The human texts are mythology, nothing more. And this fleet must be some kind of elaborate deception created by an unknown hostile power. The fleet contains 12,000 vessels, Admiral Garth replied, his stone face grim. Each ship is larger than anything we have ever constructed, and their technology appears to be at least 1,000 years ahead of our own. If this is a deception, it is one beyond our ability to comprehend or counter. Then what do they want? Demanded the Thornax War Minister, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Why have they returned after 3,000 years? And why have they brought enough firepower to destroy the entire Concord 10 times over? Before anyone could answer, the doors of the council hall opened, and the chamber fell silent. 3 figures entered, walking calmly toward the central platform where the council members sat. 2 of them wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, covering them from head to toe in protection that hummed with barely contained energy. They moved with the easy confidence of warriors who had faced death many times and had never flinched. The 3rd figure wore simple gray robes with no weapons and no armor. She was small by Thornax standards, barely reaching the chest of the guards who flanked her. But she walked as if she owned every step she took. Her hair was dark with streaks of gray, and her eyes held a weariness that spoke of burdens carried for far too long. Honored members of the Concord Council, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber without any apparent amplification. My name is Director Chun, and I represent the United Human Colonies. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. The Salinri ambassador flickered with barely contained hostility. You speak of agreement as if we had a choice, she said. Your fleet surrounds our space. Your ships block our transit routes, and your weapons are pointed at our worlds. This is not diplomacy. This is intimidation. Director Chun nodded slowly, and something that might have been guilt crossed her face. You are right to be suspicious, she admitted. We have not handled this well, and for that I apologize. But you must understand that we have spent 3,000 years alone in the void, never knowing if the next world would be our last, never certain that any civilization we encountered would not try to destroy us. We have learned caution the hard way. 3,000 years, Elder Corethville spoke up, and every eye in the chamber turned to her. The human texts end abruptly, with no explanation for your disappearance. And scholars have debated for centuries whether you ever existed at all. What happened to your species? And why did you leave? Director Chun was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with old grief. We did not leave by choice, she said. 3,000 years ago, our astronomers detected an asteroid on a collision course with Earth, our homeworld. It was massive, large enough to end all life on the planet. And we had perhaps 50 years to prepare. 50 years, the Thornax War Minister repeated, his tone skeptical. There is not enough time to evacuate an entire species. No, it was not. Director Chun agreed. We could not save everyone. So we made terrible choices about who would survive and who would be left behind. We built 12 great arc ships, each one carrying 1 million frozen colonists plus seed banks and genetic libraries and every piece of knowledge our civilization had ever produced. And then we pointed ourselves at the stars and ran. She paused, her eyes distant with memories that clearly still haunted her. Our plan was to sleep for 1,000 years, while our ships carried us to a region of space where we could start over. But something went wrong with our navigation systems. The 1,000 years became 2,000, and then 3,000. When we finally woke, we were farther from home than we had ever imagined, in a part of the galaxy that no known species had ever explored. We were alone, we were lost, and we were dying. The council chamber had grown completely silent, every being listening with growing understanding. The first century after awakening was the hardest. Director Chun continued. We lost 4 of the 12 arcs to mechanical failure and disease and accidents. We lost millions of people who had trusted us to save them. But the survivors did what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We refused to give up. We found worlds and built colonies. And when those colonies failed, we built new ones. We encountered hostile species and fought them. And when we could not win through force, we found other ways. We made mistakes and learned from them. And slowly, generation by generation, we grew strong again. But you did not come back, Carthwell said softly, for 3,000 years. You did not return to known space, and we thought you were gone forever. Director Chen's expression shifted, and for a moment she looked not like a diplomat, but like a soldier remembering a war. We could not come back, she said, not because we did not want to, but because something was blocking our path. Something that made every enemy we had ever faced look like children playing games. We call them the Vastness. The name meant nothing to the council members, but they could see the fear that crossed the faces of the human guards. And that fear was more eloquent than any explanation. The Vastness is a hive intelligence, Director Chen said, her voice flat and controlled. They are billions of years old, older than most stars. And they exist for one purpose only, to consume. They eat everything in their path, stars and planets and species, absorbing them into their collective and moving on to the next meal. We fought them for 600 years at the edge of the galaxy. We threw everything we had at them. And we finally hurt them badly enough that they decided to find easier prey. But they did not die. They retreated. And they waited. And now they are coming back. The Salinri ambassador's light had faded to a sickly green. Coming back where? She asked. Though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Here. Director Chen said simply, they are coming here. To the Concord. To all of you. You are undefended against them because you do not even know. They exist. Your fleets are toys compared to what they will bring. And your worlds are nothing but food waiting to be harvested. We came back to warn you. We came back because we could not let another civilization be destroyed while we watched and did nothing. We came back because we are tired of being alone, and because maybe, just maybe, together we might have a chance to survive what is coming. The council erupted into chaos. Voices shouting over each other in a dozen languages. But Director Chen stood calmly in the center of the storm, her eyes meeting Carthwell S. across the crowded chamber. The old Velkari scholar saw something in those human eyes that she had read about in the ancient texts, but had never truly understood until this moment. She saw a species that had stared into the abyss for 3,000 years and had refused to blink. She saw the legends made real. And she saw hope. The weeks following Director Chen's revelation were filled with chaos and conflict. As the Concord struggled to process the impossible truth that had been thrust upon them, the Salinri demanded that the human fleet withdraw beyond the galactic rim, arguing that any species capable of building such an armada was too dangerous to allow near their worlds. The Thonax began quietly mobilizing additional forces. Their warriors preparing for a war they did not understand against an enemy they had never seen. Even the peaceful Velkari, who had always advocated for diplomacy over violence, began fortifying their borders and stockpiling resources trust was in short supply. And the old legends about human aggression did nothing to calm the fears of species who had lived in peace for centuries. Director Chen and her delegation remained on Nexus Prime throughout this turmoil, patiently answering questions and providing evidence of their claims. They shared sensor data from their encounters with the Vastness, recordings of battles that had cost millions of human lives. They opened their databases to Concord scientists, allowing them to study human technology and verify that it was indeed thousands of years more advanced than anything the 12 species had developed. And they waited. because they understood that trust could not be demanded. Only earned Admiral Gorath found himself in the strange position of defending the humans to his own government, had spent his entire career preparing for threats to the Concord. And now he was arguing that the greatest threat they had ever faced could only be survived with the help of a species most people still considered mythology. "They are warriors," he told the Thornax War Council, his stone face set with conviction. "I have reviewed their battle records, and I have spoken with their commanders. And I tell you that these humans are the finest soldiers I have ever encountered. They have fought enemies that would have destroyed us in a single engagement. And they have survived through tactics and determination that I can barely comprehend. We need them." But the War Council was not convinced. And the debates continued, and precious time slipped away. Then the signal came. It arrived without warning. A pulse of focused energy that originated from outside the galaxy itself. The pulse was so powerful that it briefly outshone every star in the Concord's sensor range. Overwhelming equipment that had been designed to detect the faintest whispers of distant suns. Every species received the signal simultaneously, and it took their combined scientific resources 3 days to decode the message when they finally translated it. The debate stopped. The fear began. "We have found you." 4 words, repeated in mathematical patterns that could not be misunderstood, broadcast with enough power to reach across the void between galaxies. The vastness had arrived. Director Chen stood before the emergency council session with none of the patience she had shown in previous meetings. Her face was hard, her voice sharp, and her words carried the weight of someone who had seen this nightmare before. "We have 18 months, she said, perhaps less. The signal came from the outer edge of the galaxy, which means their vanguard is already here, already watching, already preparing. The main fleet will follow. And when it arrives, nothing in this galaxy will survive unless we are ready to fight." "How do you know this?" the Salinri ambassador demanded, though her light had dimmed to a frightened gray. "Because we have seen it before," Director Chen replied. "The vastness sends a signal to every civilization it targets. A message designed to cause panic and confusion. They want you afraid because fear makes you easy to consume. They have done this to 1,000 species across 100 galaxies. And every single one of those species is now part of the collective. Every single one except us." She let that statement hang in the air. "For a moment, you have 12 species, with 12 different technologies and 12 different military traditions," she continued, "separately. None of you stand a chance against what is coming. Together, with our help, we might have a chance, but you have to decide now, today, whether you are willing to trust us. What do you want in return?" Admiral Gorath asked, his voice carrying none of the suspicion it had held in their first meeting. Director Chen looked at him, and for a moment her mask slipped, revealing the exhaustion and longing beneath. "We want to stop running," she said softly. "We have been alone in the dark for 3,000 years. Admiral, we have built our entire civilization around survival, around the next battle, around the next threat. We are tired of being the last ones. We want to come home. We want to be part of something larger than ourselves. We want to know that when this war is over, there will be friends waiting for us instead of empty stars." The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the representatives began to speak. The Thornax War Minister was the first to stand, his massive form casting a shadow over the platform. "The Thornax have always valued strength and courage above all else," he said. "We have read the human texts, and we know what your species is capable of. If you will fight beside us, we will fight beside you." The Valkyrie Elder Carithavel rose next, her crystal form chiming with clear notes that rang through the chamber. "I have spent my life studying your legends," she said to Director Chen. "I always believed you were real, even when everyone else called me a fool." The Valkyrie stand with humanity. One by one, The other species added their voices, the aquatic Nethrin, who had never fought a war in their entire history, pledged their engineering expertise. The insectoid Krith offered their vast numbers and their ability to work as a single coordinated swarm. The silicon-based Moravians, who communicated through vibrations in stone, promised their mineral processing capabilities and their ability to build structures that could withstand almost any assault. Even the Solinri, who had been the most hostile to the human presence, eventually agreed to contribute their light-based weapons technology when the final vote was counted. It was unanimous. The Concord would stand with humanity against the vastness. Director Chun closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were wet with tears she made no effort to hide. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to us. You have no idea what it feels like to finally not be alone." Admiral Goreth stepped forward and extended his massive armored hand. "No more legends," he said. "No more myths. From this day forward, you are our allies, and your enemies are our enemies." Director Chun took his hand, her small fingers disappearing in his grip, and she smiled. "Then let me introduce you to the rest of the fleet," she said, "because we have a lot of work to do, and not much time to do it over the following months." The galaxy transformed human engineers worked alongside Concord scientists, combining technologies that had developed in isolation for millennia. Thornax warriors trained with human marines, learning tactics that had been refined through centuries of desperate warfare. Solinri weavers integrated their light-based systems with human targeting computers, creating weapons that could strike with precision across vast distances. The 12 species of the Concord began to learn what the humans had always known, that survival was not a matter of individual strength, but of working together against impossible odds. And at the edge of the galaxy, growing closer with each passing day, the vastness watched and waited and hungered for the feast to come. The Battle of the Threshold began on a day that would be remembered for as long as the galaxy endured. The vastness emerged from the void in a wave of organic ships that blotted out the stars themselves. The vastness emerged from the void in a wave of organic ships that blotted out the stars themselves. Each vessel a living nightmare of twisted flesh and ancient hunger. There were creatures the size of moons, their bodies engineered for nothing but consumption and reproduction. Their surfaces covered with weapons that fired beams of pure annihilation. Behind them came trillions of smaller forms, swarms of parasites designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers. And at the heart of the horde, pulsing with a malevolent intelligence that had devoured 1,000 civilizations, came the core minds of the collective. They had consumed worlds beyond counting. They had ended species that had existed for millions of years. They expected the Concord to fall like all the others. Screaming and helpless in the face of overwhelming power, they were not prepared for humanity. The Terran Reclamation Fleet met them at the threshold, a region of space that the humans had chosen specifically for its defensive advantages. Director Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship Endeavor, watching the impossible swarm approach on sensors that struggled to count the enemy numbers beside her. Admiral Goreth commanded a combined fleet of Concord vessels that had been retrofitted with human technology over the past 18 months. All units. "This is Director Chun," she said, her voice carrying across 1,000 channels to millions of warriors. "We did not ask for this war, and we did not start this war, but we are damn well going to finish it. Remember what we are fighting for. Remember who is counting on us. And remember that we are not alone anymore." The first wave hit like a physical force, organic ships slamming into energy shields with enough power to shake vessels from stem to stern. Human destroyers darted through the chaos, their weapons firing in precise patterns that carved holes in the enemy formations. Thornax dreadnoughts advanced in solid phalanxes, their armored hulls absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any conventional ship. Cylindry lightweavers projected interference patterns that confused enemy targeting, creating blind spots in the vastness's sensor networks and everywhere. Human soldiers did what humans had always done. They fought with a ferocity that defied rational explanation. Marine boarding parties launched themselves at enemy vessels, cutting through organic holes with plasma torches and fighting hand-to-hand in conditions that would have driven any other species mad. Fighter pilots flew missions that had no chance of return, buying time for larger ships to complete their objectives. Commanders made impossible decisions with impossible speed, sacrificing squadrons to save fleets and fleets to save worlds. The cost was terrible. Within the first hour, 3,000 ships had been destroyed, their crews lost to the vacuum or consumed by the vastness. Within the first day, the casualties numbered in the millions. Lives snuffed out in moments of violence that would haunt the survivors forever. But the line-held Admiral Gorath commanded his Thornax from the front, his flagship trading blows with enemy capital ships 10 times its size. His stone face showed no fear as damage reports flooded in, as sections of his vessel were torn away by enemy fire. As warriors he had known for centuries died around him. "Push forward," he ordered, his voice steady as the world burned. "Give them nothing, and take from them everything." On the fourth day, the vastness changed its tactics. The hive mind had realized that these prey were different, that they would not break and run like so many others before. Instead of continuing the frontal assault, the collective began to probe for weaknesses, sending smaller forces to test the Allied defenses while the main fleet regrouped. It was during one of these probing attacks that the battle reached Kethrani Station, the same lonely outpost where sensor technician Rill had first seen the shadows in the stars. Rill was still there, having refused evacuation despite having no combat training. He had watched the legends become real, and he was not going to miss the conclusion when Vastness Assault Force broke through the outer defenses and headed for the station. It was Rill who spotted them first, incoming hostiles, bearing 77420 vessels, he reported, his voice surprisingly calm. They are heading directly for the station. The response came not from Concord Command, but from a human voice he did not recognize. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Terran Marine Corps, and we have your position. Hold tight. We are on our way." The human ships arrived just as the Vastness vessels reached weapons range, a squadron of sleek destroyers that moved with predatory grace. What followed was the most one-sided engagement Rill had ever witnessed. The humans fought as if they had been born for this moment, their ships dancing through enemy fire while delivering devastating counterstrikes. Captain Rodriguez led the charge personally, her vessel taking hits that should have destroyed it, while she continued to press the attack. When her ship finally lost engine power, she rammed it into the largest enemy vessel, ejecting at the last moment and being recovered by a passing shuttle. The assault force was destroyed in 7 minutes. Rill stared at his sensors, unable to process what he had just seen. "Why?" he whispered into the communication channel. "Why do you fight like that? Why do you sacrifice so much for strangers you have never met?" There was a pause, and then Captain Rodriguez's voice came through, tired but warm. "Because that is what humans do," she said. "Because 3,000 years ago, we ran away and left our world to burn. And we swore that we would never do that again. Because you are not strangers anymore. You are family." The battle continued for 11 days. 11 days of constant combat, of victories and defeats, of sacrifices that would become legends in their own right. On the 7th day, the vastness began to falter. The combined technology of humanity and the Concord proved too adaptable, too innovative, too determined to overcome. Every time the hive mind developed a counter to Allied tactics, the humans responded with something new. Every time the collective threatened to overwhelm a position, The Concord species found reserves of courage they had not known they possessed on the 11th day. The vastness retreated, the core minds of the collective. Ancient intelligences that had never known defeat pulled back their forces and fled into the void. They left behind the shattered remains of their assault fleet. Millions of organic hulks drifting dead in the space between stars, and they left behind something else: fear. For the first time in their billion-year existence, the vastness had encountered something they could not consume. They had met humanity. The aftermath of the battle was a mixture of grief and celebration. The losses had been staggering. With casualties in the hundreds of millions across all species, worlds had been scarred, fleets had been decimated, and wounds had been inflicted that would take generations to heal. But the galaxy was still free. Director Chun stood on the observation deck of the Endeavor, watching the stars that humanity had left behind 3,000 years ago. Admiral Gorath stood beside her, his massive form still bearing the scars of combat, his stone face unreadable. "The war is not over," Chun said quietly. "The vastness will return. They always do, and next time they will bring more. And we will have to be ready." "Then we will be ready," Gorath replied. Together, Chun turned to look at him. And for the first time since the battle began, she allowed herself to smile. "The Concord voted this morning," Gorath continued, his rumbling voice softening. "It was unanimous. Humanity is no longer a legend to be debated by scholars. You are our 13th species. You are one of us. You are home." Chun closed her eyes, and tears ran down her face. Tears that she had held back for 3,000 years of exile and war and desperate survival. "Home," she whispered, tasting the word as if for the first time. "I had almost forgotten what that felt like." "Then let us remind you," Gorath said. And he placed one massive hand on her shoulder with surprising gentleness in the histories written afterward. Scholars would debate the true turning point of the Vastness War. Some said it was the technology that the humans brought with them. Others claimed it was tactical genius, forged in centuries of desperate combat. The Valkyrie historians, led by Elder Karth Vel, had a different theory. The humans, they wrote, had survived the void not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most ruthless. They had survived because they understood something that the vastness never could. They understood that survival meant nothing without something worth surviving for. They had returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as guardians, not as legends, but as family. And the Concord, once so certain that humans were nothing but myths told to frighten children, discovered something that changed everything. The legends were true, all of them. Every impossible story, every unbelievable feat, every act of sacrifice and courage that scholars had dismissed as fantasy. It was all real. And now, for the first time in 3,000 years, humanity was no longer alone in the dark. They were home, and they were never leaving again.